Today we're going to be talking about how to make a sheath in a welted construction. This knife I just finished, forged lumber mill blade. That is a stained deer leg. I'm not sure which particular bone, but it is a deer leg bone. And this is a forged wrought iron guard. Okay, the things you'll need is the knife that you're working on. You'll need the specific knife. You'll need things to mark with, ink pen, pencil. I usually do pencil first and then go back over with ink pen. I like to use craft paper because it's a little more rigid than newspaper or printer paper. Something to cut the leather with, something to cut your thread with. I use 0.8mm waxed thread, and I use the needles that match that. These are saddlery needles, saddle making needles. So they fit the 0.8mm thread. I like to use welded contact cement. That's what I hold the layers together with before I do my stitching. I like to use what I refer to as a grooving tool. I've heard it referred to that way as well. If I find out what it's actually called, I will put it here somewhere so you can see it and say, I need one of those, I will buy that. And I'll explain why you need that later. But also, this is a super basic little tool to do designs and leatherwork. So I may do some kind of little floral design just to show you guys how to do that. And you'll also need a stain of some kind if you really want to. One of the things that I really like is this Phoebing's leather color. It always goes on really good. It tends to be a little light, so you have to go over it a little bit, but the colors do come together and it's not splotchy or streak. In the past, I have used my rusty vinegar for leather stain, and it produces a sort of gray color, and that might actually be cool for this, but we're not going to do it. We're going to be using this black, so it'll go along with the forged and stained theme of the knife. We'll get down to it. Right off the bat, we're going to trace the blade. You only want to trace the blade because this isn't going to go up onto the guard or anything like a hunting knife or something. Just trace that out. And if you have a little indentation like here, the ricasso in the blade, you want to go straight back like the blade just kept going back. So this part here, this will just go straight back. To this, we will need to add a seam allowance, and that seam will be our welt. Typically you want to add about 1/4 inch. So just try to go 1/4 inch all the way around. And if you really need to, you can take a ruler, lay beside of it, mark it, move it a little bit, mark it, move it a little bit. If you need to, that's a good way to keep consistent with it, or if you have a compass or something like that. One thing you'd like to do as well, you don't really want the sheath stabbing you, so you want to make the sheath just slightly round. Okay, now that we have this, we're going to cut this out and transfer it to the leather. This is about 6-ounce veg tan leather. When you use oil tan leather or any other like chemically tanned leather, they tend to sweat the chemicals through the leather onto your blade, and it will rust your blade. One thing you make sure of is if you cut one this direction, that you'll also need to cut one in the opposite direction so you have a front and a back. Now that we have this cut out, this will be the layer that goes in between these two, and that the blade will slide into. So when you're cutting out your pieces, try to keep your blade straight up and down. Now with our strap cut, we're going to use a piece of 120 sandpaper. You want to use 120 or 150. You want it to be a little gritty, but you don't want it to be super gritty. And you're just going to clean the edge. Our next step is going to be to sand this top side of the welt so that the contact cement will stick. What we'll do, just put a very, very mild layer of your contact cement on. Line up your edges, just like so. If it hangs over just a little bit, that's okay. Just press those together pretty good. Now I've got a leatherworking hammer. Okay, so what we're doing now is we're just working on the design for the tooling. I'm going to go with a really old skull, a little bit of an angle, and then I'm going to do some scroll designs. Now that we have a design, this is just a skull and a little bit of scroll work, and it will say Memento Mori inside that. So our first step is to wet this just a little bit. Just take a paper towel. You don't have to soak it, just where you can tell that it's changed colors a little bit. Now you're going to go back in, kind of go over the same lines with a knife that isn't very sharp, because you don't want to cut through. You just want to make some indentations. Okay, now that we've got our lines put in, you can see those pretty good. We're going to wet the leather one more time, just a little, like so. We have this little shading tool here. You can see that it's got kind of a cross-hatched look. See if it'll focus. So, mainly going to be using this inside of the eyes. You'll want to line the tip of this up with the line that you have kind of scratched in. Just give it a couple little pecks. With this spoon tool here, it's got a little bit of a edge to it. It's not sharp, and then this end is also kind of an edge, but it's also not sharp. You can use these like on the edge here. Just go in that line and just rub it down, and that pushes the leather into itself like that. It also produces a really nice 3D effect. Just go real gentle with it. Okay, now that I have all of my tooling done, all I have to do is attach the top and the bottom piece with a little bit of contact cement. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this little edging grooving tool and put in our stitch line. So you want to start at the top. Okay, so what I'm going to do first is I'm just going to lightly sand over the top. Usually I don't do this, but I want it to look kind of aged. I like to use a piece of scrap fabric for this. I do quite a bit of sewing, so I usually have little pieces of scrap laying around. Now we're going to put the holes into the sheath that we'll be stitching. That little groove that goes all the way around, that's what I'm going to stitch into. The drill bit I'm using is some kind of metric size. It's just a little bit bigger than a 1/16 bit. 1/16 would probably work though. Okay, so we're about to stitch this sheath, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to saddle stitch it. You use 2 different needles. To thread these, you're going to take your needle, run the thread through it, and then run it back into the eye. Give it a good little pull on there. That's what it'll look like. So you're going to run only 1 needle through the first hole. So that the 2 needles are even with an even amount of thread. Now you're going to take 1 needle, go into the hole that is next from that side. Make sure that's pulled through. Don't pull that too hard yet. And the top on the other side, run through the same hole on the other side. Now that you've got it from both sides, just pull it tight. You've got your first stitch. You're going to go all the way down and then back up, and then all the way down, back up, so that every hole has 2 stitches from both sides in it. Just cut off the majority. You want to leave about a 1/16 of an inch sticking out. You're just going to heat it a little bit to get that wax hot, and then press it into the hole. If you recall the belt loop, now we need to do 2 holes, line those up with the back, and we'll be putting a rivet and a burr on that. I'll explain that. This is a rivet and burr. This is the rivet part. It's got a little bit of a head on it. It's got a tapered top, And then this is the burr, as it's called. It's just a little washer. So we're going to take one of the washers, and I've just got a little rivet and burr set. So that's pressed down. You can see washers have been pressed down, and now there's just a little exposed rivet left. So we're just going to put it back on there. And now we're just going to brad those around. Now this sheath is done. See those? Nice and smooth, they won't catch on anything. If you do these right, they won't rub holes or anything.